Angela adjusted her ID badge one last time as she walked through the hospital corridors she knew better than her own neighborhood. The sterile scent of disinfectant and faint hum of machines greeted her like usual, but something felt off today. She couldn't explain it, just a tightness in her chest, a weight that hadn't been there the day before. Maybe it was just fatigue. The double shifts were catching up. Or maybe it was that strained look her supervisor gave her during handoff this morning, the one that didn't come with a smile or her usual nod of approval. She barely had time to process it before her phone vibrated in her pocket. Report to room 3B immediately. Her brow furrowed. That was odd. Nurses didn't get summoned to human resources out of the blue unless it was serious enough to pull her off the floor in the middle of her shift. She hesitated outside the room, wiped her palms on her scrubs, and knocked gently before stepping inside. Two people were waiting, Ms. Cartwright from HR, and her floor supervisor, Mr. Henley, who wouldn't quite meet her eyes. The blinds were half closed. Angela sat down, her heart already pounding. Angela, Cartwright began, clasping her hands together in front of her desk, thank you for coming. I know this is unexpected, and we'll try to keep it brief. Angela forced a tight smile. Is something wrong? Henley cleared his throat and finally looked up. There have been some restructuring changes. The hospital is undergoing major budget cuts, and unfortunately, your position is being eliminated. Silence filled the room. Angela blinked. My position is being eliminated. She repeated, unsure if she'd misheard. Yes, Cartwright nodded solemnly. This decision wasn't personal. It's across departments. A few nurses, some admin staff, we had to make very difficult choices. Angela stared at them, stunned. Just last week she'd been awarded for excellence in patient care. Her patients loved her. She'd stayed long nights when others didn't, comforted grieving families, taken extra shifts during COVID, mentored new nurses. All of it seemed to dissolve into the air between them. So that's it. After 8 years, you're telling me I'm done, just like that. Her voice wavered, but she wouldn't let it break. We'll offer you 2 months severance and support for job placement, Cartwright said, avoiding the weight of Angela's stare. Henley shifted uncomfortably. You've been one of our best, Angela. This has nothing to do with performance. If it were up to me. But it's not up to you, Angela cut in sharply. It never is. The silence hung again. Cartwright slid a folder across the desk. Inside were termination forms, benefits information, the hospital's official apology letter. Angela didn't touch it. She stood slowly, trying to compose herself. You know, this job wasn't just a paycheck. I've held dying hands in your ICU, sat with dementia patients when their own families couldn't be bothered to visit, taught interns how to actually talk to people, not just treat symptoms. I was this hospital. Her voice cracked at the edges now. But I guess all that's worth less than a line in a spreadsheet. Cartwright looked down. Henley looked ashamed, but neither stopped her when she turned and walked out. As she exited the HR office, Angela passed by nurses rushing between rooms, monitors beeping steadily, a code blue being called over the intercom. The world was still spinning, but hers had just come to a screeching halt. She reached her locker, removed her stethoscope, folded her scrub jacket, and placed them both inside. Her name was still on the door, but for the first time in years, she felt like she didn't belong. She closed it quietly, walked down the hallway with her head high, and stepped out into the sunlight, unsure of what came next. The sun was just beginning to dip below the tops of the buildings as Angela wandered through the city park, the orange light streaking long shadows across the grass. Her footsteps were slow and uncertain, her nurse's shoes pressing into the paved trail as if every step required permission. The faint chatter of families picnicking in the distance, children laughing by the pond, and birds chirping in the branches overhead provided a soft backdrop, but Angela wasn't truly hearing any of it. Her mind was spinning, looping through the events of the last hour like a broken film reel. She had left the hospital numb, carrying nothing but her purse and a folded envelope filled with exit paperwork. She hadn't cried, not yet. That part was still sitting in her chest like a stone. It wasn't just the loss of a job, it was the loss of a role that had defined her for years. She had become a nurse not for the paycheck or the title, but because she believed in helping people, in being someone patients could trust when their world was falling apart. Her uniform was more than fabric, it was armor. Now, stripped of it, she felt exposed and untethered. She veered off the main trail and found a quiet bench beneath a tall sycamore tree. Its branches curled like gentle arms above her head, casting dappled shade across her lap. She sat, letting the silence press in around her. In the distance, a couple walked a golden retriever. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, nodding politely. Everyone seemed to have a place to go, something to do. Angela, for the first time in years, didn't. She pulled out her phone, instinctively checking the hospital group chat. It was still buzzing with updates, room assignments, patient alerts, reminders for charting. Her name had already been removed from the staff list. Just like that, it was as if she had never been there. She turned the phone off and slid it back into her bag. A breeze stirred the leaves above her, and for a moment, she closed her eyes and let the wind move through her hair. It felt good to breathe without fluorescent lights or the sound of alarms in the background. But with the calm came the creeping fear. Rent was due in a week, and she had no backup plan. Nursing was all she knew. Could she start over? Would another hospital take her this quickly? She hadn't even had time to update her resume. Her stomach growled, but she didn't feel like eating. She pulled her jacket tighter, suddenly chilled despite the warmth of the afternoon. A nearby boy chased a paper airplane across the grass, his laughter ringing out clearly. It made her smile faintly. Moments like these reminded her why she had become a nurse in the first place, not for the system, not for the titles, but for people. For real life, lived out in moments like this, raw, imperfect, and beautiful. A woman passed by with a stroller and glanced at Angela, giving her a small nod. Angela returned it absently, wondering if the woman could somehow sense the heaviness in her heart. She probably just thought Angela was enjoying a quiet break from work. If only she knew. Angela leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees and burying her face in her hands. She stayed like that for a while, the world continuing around her. Part of her wanted to stay there forever, tucked away under the tree, invisible and still. But another part, small but persistent, began whispering, "You're not done yet. There's more for you. This isn't the end." She sat up and looked around, her eyes scanning the park without meaning to. Old habits. Always alert, always watching. That's when she saw him, a man in a suit, mid-60s maybe, wobbling on his feet just a few yards ahead. Something in the way he moved triggered her instincts. Angela rose slowly, her attention locked on him. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change again. Angela's eyes locked onto the man just as his knees buckled beneath him. One moment he was upright, walking slowly along the path with a briefcase in one hand, and the next, he crumpled forward like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud that silenced the park around him. A nearby group of teenagers froze mid-conversation. A woman screamed. Someone dropped their phone. Angela was already moving. Her nursing instincts kicked in before her thoughts could catch up. She sprinted across the grass, the envelope of HR paperwork falling from her bag unnoticed. "Call 911, she shouted, her voice clear and commanding. "Someone call now." People gathered quickly, forming a wide circle around the fallen man, but no one stepped in. Most looked stunned, unsure, or too afraid to touch him. Angela pushed through, dropping to her knees beside him. The man was face down, unmoving. She gently rolled him onto his back, her fingers already reaching for his wrist. No pulse. His lips had a bluish tint, and his eyes were half-lidded, staring at nothing. No pulse. Not breathing, she muttered to herself. "Okay. Come on. Stay with me." She tilted his head back, opened his airway, and began chest compressions. Her palms pressed down hard and fast, counting in her head, 1, 2, 3, 4, as sweat gathered on her brow. The bystanders watched in silence, transfixed by her urgency, her precision. Someone nearby finally managed to call emergency services, mumbling into the phone, "Yes, there's a man, he collapsed, there's a woman giving CPR, please hurry." Angela didn't stop. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Repeat. She could feel her arms straining, but she pushed the fatigue away. This man didn't have time for hesitation. As she compressed his chest again, a crack echoed beneath her hands. It didn't make her flinch, she knew the sound of breaking ribs. It happened sometimes during CPR. It meant she was doing it right. Her voice remained steady as she worked. "Come on. Breathe. You're not going out like this." Somewhere nearby, a baby began crying. Dogs barked. But to Angela, the world had narrowed to this one fragile moment. One man's life. One chance. He suddenly gave a twitch, barely more than a flinch, but it was enough to make her pause for a split second. Then another twitch. Then a weak gasp. Yes, Angela said aloud. That's it. You're coming back to me. She quickly checked his pulse again. It was faint, thready, but there. She turned him slightly to the side in recovery position, keeping his airway clear. His eyes fluttered, and she gently tapped his cheek. Stay with me, sir. Help is on the way. He looked at her like he was trying to speak, but only a wheeze escaped. His hand twitched again, fingers curling weakly toward her. The sound of sirens rose in the distance, growing louder by the second. A fire engine turned onto the park path, followed by an ambulance. People began stepping back as paramedics ran up with a stretcher and equipment bags. She saved him, one of the bystanders said, pointing at Angela. She was here first. A paramedic knelt beside Angela, nodding. You a nurse? I was, she replied, standing and wiping her hands on her pants. Still am, I guess. The medic gave her a look of respect. You just bought him time. We'll take it from here. Angela stepped back, her heart still racing. She watched as they placed the man on the stretcher and administered oxygen. As the ambulance doors closed behind him, the crowd began to disperse. Someone patted her shoulder. Another murmured, well done. Angela didn't feel heroic. She felt tired, disoriented, and strangely hollow. But beneath it all, a flicker of something warm was growing in her chest, not pride, exactly. Something deeper. She had lost everything hours ago. And yet, somehow, she'd just given someone else the chance to live. The paramedics moved with practiced urgency, lifting the stretcher into the ambulance while continuing to monitor the man's vitals. One held an oxygen mask firmly over his face, another inserted an IV, and a third relayed details into a radio clipped to his vest. Angela stood just a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her fingers still trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her. Her knees ached from the hard ground, and her scrubs, though no longer required, were damp with sweat. The wail of the sirens pierced the stillness of the park once again as the ambulance began to pull away, its red lights flashing across the trees and casting strange shadows over the curious onlookers. Angela followed it with her eyes until it disappeared down the park road. Then came the silence. The crowd thinned rapidly, returning to their own lives as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Just another park, just another day. Angela turned slowly, unsure of what to do with herself. Her pulse was still pounding in her ears. She spotted the envelope that had fallen from her bag earlier, resting in the grass. As she bent to pick it up, she heard footsteps approaching behind her. Angela. She looked up, startled. A familiar voice, deep, kind, laced with surprise. It was Marcus, one of the paramedics. They'd worked together at the hospital dozens of times before. Hey, she said, forcing a faint smile. I thought that was you, he said, breathing a little heavily as he stopped in front of her. Wasn't sure at first. You okay? She nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, I'm okay. Just one of those days. Marcus looked her over. You saved that man's life. If you hadn't jumped in when you did. I know, she said softly. I didn't even think. I just reacted. He nodded, watching her for a moment. I heard what happened. About the hospital. I'm really sorry, Angela. You didn't deserve that. Her jaw tightened. Thanks. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Marcus shook his head, clearly frustrated on her behalf. You were one of the best. Still are. This city needs more nurses like you. Angela offered a tired smile. Tell that to HR. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the breeze moving gently through the trees around them. Angela could feel the weight of everything settling on her shoulders again. The job she'd lost, the uncertainty ahead, the fact that even now, in this moment, she still didn't know what her next step would be. You going to be okay? Marcus asked, more gently this time. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe. I hope so. Well, he said, reaching into his pocket, if you ever want to talk, or if you need a reference, or just someone to vent to, here. He handed her a folded piece of paper with his number on it. You're not alone in this. Angela took it and nodded, her throat tightening. Thanks, Marcus. He smiled, touched her arm briefly, and then jogged back toward the ambulance. She watched him go, standing still as the park slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Joggers picking up their pace, kids resuming their games, dog walkers continuing their paths. Angela looked down at the envelope in her hand, then back at the path where the man had collapsed. The grass was slightly indented where his body had lain. No other trace remained. But something had shifted inside her, subtle but unmistakable. Maybe she'd lost her job, but she hadn't lost her purpose. She hadn't lost who she was. She turned away from the scene slowly, breathing in the warm evening air. She still didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she had one truth to carry with her now. Today, she made a difference. And sometimes, that was enough to keep moving forward. The sun had long dipped below the skyline by the time Angela arrived home. Her apartment, a modest second-floor unit in an aging brick building, was quiet and dim. She dropped her bag by the door and kicked off her shoes, letting the silence wrap around her like a weighted blanket. The adrenaline from the park had faded, leaving behind a strange blend of exhaustion and restlessness. Her mind refused to settle, cycling through the day's events like they were scenes from a movie she couldn't stop replaying. She poured herself a glass of water and sat on the edge of the couch, staring blankly at the floor. The envelope from the hospital still sat on her coffee table, unopened since she'd dropped it off earlier. The words, "termination packet," stared back at her like a cruel label. Part of her wanted to rip it in half. Another part just didn't have the energy. Outside, the city buzzed on as always. Distant car horns. The murmur of voices in the hallway. A baby crying somewhere on the floor below. Life, still moving, even when hers felt like it had paused. She barely noticed the faint rumble of engines outside her building until it grew louder, too loud to ignore. Angela stood and walked to the window, parting the blinds with 2 fingers. Her breath caught. 5 sleek black cars, luxury models, clearly expensive, were slowly pulling into the narrow lot in front of her building. Tinted windows, chrome wheels, impeccably clean, even under the streetlights. They parked in a staggered line like something out of a movie. Angela blinked, unsure if she was hallucinating from stress. The cars idled for a moment before the engines shut off in near unison. Doors opened. From each vehicle, a sharply dressed individual emerged. Men and women in tailored suits, all moving with quiet purpose. One man, tall with graying hair and a calm presence, stepped forward toward the entrance. Angela stepped back from the window, heart suddenly racing. What was this? Police? Some strange mistake? Debt collectors? No, none of that made sense. Her fingers hovered over her phone, unsure whether to call someone or simply hide. Then came the knock. It was firm but not aggressive. Measured. Confident. She moved to the door slowly, cautiously. "Who is it?" she called through the wood. A voice replied, deep and composed. "Ms. Angela Brooks." Her breath hitched. "Yes. My name is Julian Morrow. May I speak with you? I represent Mr. Theodore Morrow." Angela opened the door halfway, her hand still gripping the edge tightly. The man standing before her was impeccably dressed, his suit more expensive than anything she'd ever touched. But his expression wasn't cold, it was sincere, and somehow, familiar. "The man you saved today in the park," he said gently. "That was my father." Angela's eyes widened. Her grip on the door loosened slightly. He's okay. He's stable, conscious, and asking about the woman who saved his life." Julian's voice was calm but firm. "We came to thank you. All of us." She looked past him, seeing the others now gathered near the sidewalk. Some held small bags or boxes. One older woman wiped her eyes as she looked up at Angela's window. Julian continued, "You didn't hesitate. You weren't looking for recognition. You just acted. My father wouldn't be alive if not for you." Angela's throat tightened, the weight of the moment settling over her like a wave. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said softly. "I know," Julian replied with a warm smile. "That's why we're here." And for the first time that day, Angela felt something stir inside her, something like hope. Angela stood in the doorway, still processing the man's words as the group outside remained quietly waiting, watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to gratitude. Everything felt surreal. Just hours ago, she had left the hospital unemployed, uncertain of her future. Now, 5 luxury cars and a man in a $1,000 suit stood outside her humble apartment, thanking her for something she hadn't even thought twice about doing. Julian Morrow gave her a gentle nod. May we come in for just a few minutes? Or, if you'd prefer, we can speak somewhere more comfortable. But my father, he's quite insistent that we speak with you tonight. Angela hesitated, her mind racing. She glanced behind her into her apartment, small, neat, but far from the setting for what felt like a moment pulled from a high-budget drama. Still, the sincerity in Julian's eyes disarmed her. Sure. You can come in, she said softly, stepping aside. Julian motioned to the others, and only two of them followed, an elegant older woman in a navy dress, and a younger woman in business attire holding a sleek leather folder. The rest remained outside by the cars, giving them space. Angela appreciated that. The visitors moved with quiet grace, as though they were stepping into a sacred place. Angela gestured toward the couch and chairs. Sorry, it's not much. It's perfect, Julian said, taking a seat. The older woman sat beside him, her eyes fixed on Angela with unmistakable warmth. I'm Evelyn, she said, offering her hand. I'm Theodore's wife. I just wanted to see the woman who brought my husband back to us. Angela accepted the handshake, feeling the weight of Evelyn's gratitude in the simple gesture. I didn't know who he was, Angela said, sitting across from them. He was just a person who needed help. That's what makes it extraordinary, Julian said. You didn't hesitate. You acted with compassion, with skill. The paramedics said you kept him alive until they arrived. If even a few more minutes had passed. Angela looked down at her hands, still faintly marked from the ground at the park. It's what I was trained to do. But you weren't on duty, Evelyn added gently. You weren't even employed anymore, were you? Angela nodded slowly. I was let go earlier that day. Downsizing. Julian exchanged a quick glance with the younger woman beside him, who opened the folder and slid a piece of paper onto the table between them. Angela looked at it, brow furrowed. It wasn't hospital paperwork or legal jargon. It was a letter, on thick, embossed stationery, with Theodore Morrow's name printed in sharp, formal script at the top. Angela picked it up and read. It was handwritten. To Angela Brooks. You saved my life before you knew who I was. That, to me, is the purest kind of heroism. I owe you more than words. Whatever life I have left, I want to use it to lift people like you, people who choose compassion, even when no one's watching. My family and I would like to offer you an opportunity, not charity, but partnership. Let us help you do what you were born to do. With deepest thanks, Theodore Morrow. Angela's hands trembled slightly as she lowered the letter. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. What kind of opportunity? Julian smiled. That's up to you. My father has several philanthropic ventures. He owns a medical foundation. We'd like to fund whatever dream you've had to put on hold. Whether it's going back to school to become a doctor, opening a clinic, running a program for underserved communities, we will provide the resources. Angela stared at him, stunned. Evelyn reached forward and touched her hand lightly. Whatever you need, dear, she said. You gave us back a husband, a father. Now let us help give something back to you. And for the first time in a long while, Angela's heart felt light, not because everything made sense, but because something beautiful had emerged from her darkest day. 2 days later, Angela found herself walking through the arched gates of a private estate that looked like it belonged in a movie. Smooth stone paths wound through manicured gardens, and a series of fountains lined the entrance like a welcome parade. She barely recognized herself, wearing the soft cream blouse and tailored pants one of the Morrow assistants had brought over earlier. She looked more like a guest speaker at a conference than a woman who had just been laid off and happened to save a stranger's life in a park. She clutched the invitation in her hand like it might dissolve, part of her still half convinced this was all some elaborate misunderstanding. But then the butler at the door smiled warmly, nodded as if he'd been expecting her, and led her through a stunning entryway into a private dining room glowing with soft light and crystal chandeliers. Theodore Morrow was already seated at the head of the long table, a thin blanket tucked over his lap. He looked older than he had in the photos Angela had seen online, but he also looked more alive. His skin had regained color, and his eyes, though a bit tired, were sharp and warm. He stood, slowly but proudly, when he saw her. There she is, he said, voice smooth and gravelly with age. The angel in sneakers. Angela smiled, a bit flustered. You don't need to call me that. I was just in the right place at the right time. You were in the exact place at the perfect time, he said. Come, sit. Join me. She took a seat beside him, and before long, Julian and Evelyn joined them as well, along with a few other family members and close advisors. The table was covered in a gorgeous spread, roasted vegetables, seared fish, and a decanter of something rich and red. But despite the elegant setting, the conversation was warm and grounded. They spoke of her upbringing, her love of nursing, the patients who had changed her life. She shared stories of double shifts, the feeling of holding a patient's hand during their final breaths, and the quiet victories that made all the stress worth it. They listened intently, with genuine interest, not the polite nodding of wealthy benefactors, but the focus of people who truly wanted to understand her heart. Eventually, Theodore placed his glass down and turned to her, eyes serious. I've lived long enough to know that money, on its own, means nothing. But when given to the right people, with the right vision, it can change lives. Angela remained quiet, waiting. I meant what I wrote to you, he continued. You saved me when you had nothing to gain. You acted out of instinct, of principle. That kind of spirit is rare. And I'd like to invest in that. He snapped his fingers gently, and Julian reached beneath the table, pulling out a slim leather folder. Inside were documents, official, notarized, but clearly prepared with care. We've created a fund in your name, Theodore said. An open invitation. You can use it to pursue your doctorate, open your own clinic, create a program for aspiring nurses of color, whatever speaks to you. No strings. No repayment. Just your vision. Angela blinked, stunned into silence. She looked down at the numbers on the page. More money than she'd ever imagined holding in her name. It felt like fiction. But when she looked up at their faces, hopeful, generous, patient, she knew it was real. There's more, Evelyn said softly. One of the cars outside, it's yours now. We figured you might want something that reflects where you're headed. Angela laughed, her eyes tearing. I don't even know how to process this. Julian leaned forward. You don't have to decide everything tonight. But know this, whatever you choose to build, we're behind you. Angela looked around the table, overwhelmed and deeply moved. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like a nurse without a job. She felt like a woman standing at the edge of something new. Something she could finally create on her own terms. A month later, Angela stood at the front entrance of a building that now bore her name, the Angela Brooks Community Health Center. The letters gleamed proudly on the newly renovated facade, beneath a canopy of fresh ivy and a banner that read, Grand Opening Today. Balloons bobbed gently in the summer breeze, and a small crowd was beginning to gather, families, local leaders, a few former patients who had followed her story in the news. She hadn't chosen a high-rise in a polished downtown district. Instead, the clinic stood in the heart of the neighborhood she grew up in, an area overlooked by funding and forgotten by larger institutions. The building had once been a shuttered daycare center, windows boarded and roof sagging. Now, thanks to the Morrow Foundation and a small army of builders, architects, and volunteers, it had transformed into a space of healing and hope. Angela adjusted her white coat, which felt heavier today, but in a different way, weighted not by exhaustion, but by purpose. Inside, exam rooms gleamed with new equipment, and the walls were painted soft, calming colors. There was a wellness room, a counseling office, even a small play area for children. It wasn't massive, but it was hers. It was right. Staff bustled inside preparing for the opening, nurses she had personally selected from local programs, receptionists who spoke both English and Spanish, a volunteer coordinator already making a list of local high schoolers interested in healthcare. Angela had interviewed every person herself. She didn't want this place to run like a hospital with endless red tape. She wanted it to feel like family. As she stepped onto the front steps to welcome guests, she spotted Julian Morrow standing near the curb, dressed less formally than usual, wearing a soft smile. He gave her a nod of encouragement, arms crossed as he watched her with pride. Angela took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone set up at the podium. The crowd hushed. Good morning, she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. I used to think purpose came with a title, with a badge or a job description. But sometimes, purpose shows up when everything else falls apart. She looked out at the faces in the crowd. Some she recognized from her old shifts at the hospital. Others were strangers. But all of them were listening. I lost my job. I thought I'd lost everything. But then, I had the chance to help someone, without being asked, without a paycheck, without anyone watching. That one moment brought me here. To this. She gestured to the building behind her. This health center isn't just about medicine. It's about access. About dignity. About meeting people where they are, and offering care that sees the whole person, not just the symptoms. There were murmurs of approval, a few nods, even some quiet applause. Angela smiled. This isn't just my story. It's yours too. It belongs to every nurse who stayed late, every neighbor who looks out for another, every person who chooses kindness when no one's watching. So, thank you, for believing in what we can do together. She stepped back, and the applause grew. People clapped not just for her words, but for the journey she had taken, and the one they would now take together. Inside the clinic, the first patients were already arriving. A mother with 2 young boys. An elderly man using a walker. Angela greeted each one personally, listening, laughing, guiding them inside. Later, she walked the halls alone for a moment, letting the quiet soak in. She paused outside exam room 1, touched the door frame, and smiled. This was her beginning, not as someone who'd been fired, not as a former nurse, but as a builder, a healer, a leader. She hadn't just saved a man's life in the park. She'd stepped into her own.